The explosion echoed across the canyon like thunder from a cloudless sky, and Eleanor Owens felt the ground tremble beneath her boots as water began to spray through the first crack in the dam. It was September 1883, and the drought had strangled Paso Robles, California, for 3 years running. The reservoir behind Morrison Dam held what remained of the precious water supply for the entire valley, but Eleanor knew something the ranchers downstream did not. The dam was failing. She had seen the fissures spreading like spider webs through the concrete and stone during her daily rides to check on her father's horses. Her father, Thomas Owens, had died 6 months ago from pneumonia, leaving her alone with a failing ranch and debts she could never hope to repay. But today, standing on the ridge overlooking the dam, Eleanor had made a choice that would change everything. The water company that controlled the dam had refused to listen to her warnings. They called her hysterical, said a woman had no business understanding engineering. So Eleanor had taken matters into her own hands. She had purchased dynamite from the mining supply store in town, claiming she needed to clear rocks from her property. Then, before dawn this morning, she had ridden to the dam and placed the charges strategically at the weakest points she had identified. Better a controlled break than a catastrophic collapse that would kill everyone downstream. The water was coming now, faster than she had anticipated. Eleanor swung onto her mare, a gray Mustang named Silver, and raced down the hillside toward the valley. She had to warn them. 3 ranches sat directly in the flood path, close enough to the dam that they would be hit within the hour. Further downstream, the town would have time to prepare, but those 3 ranches needed to evacuate immediately. The first ranch belonged to the Hendersons, an elderly couple who had been kind to her father. The second belonged to the Matsons, a family with 6 children who had always treated her with respect despite her unmarried status at 23. The third ranch belonged to Garrett Lawson. Garrett Lawson was a mystery that had occupied Eleanor's thoughts far more than she cared to admit. He had arrived in Paso Robles 2 years ago with enough money to buy the old Mitchell Ranch and a reputation that preceded him. Some said he had been a lawman in Texas. Others whispered he had killed 3 men in a dispute over cards. What everyone agreed on was that Garrett Lawson was dangerous, solitary, and wanted nothing to do with society. Eleanor had spoken to him exactly twice. Once when his cattle had broken through a fence onto her property, and once at her father's funeral, where he had stood at the back of the church, hat in hand, and nodded to her with such genuine sympathy in his dark eyes that she had nearly wept all over again. Now she was about to destroy his ranch along with the others, but at least they would be alive. Silver's hooves pounded against the hard, packed earth as they reached the valley floor. The Hendersons were first. Eleanor shouted before she even reached the house, her voice raw and desperate. "Flood." "The dam broke. You have to leave now." Martha Henderson appeared on the porch, her weathered face creasing with confusion. "What are you saying, child? The Morrison Dam broke. There is a wall of water coming. You have maybe 30 minutes. Take your horses and ride for high ground. Please, Mrs. Henderson, you have to trust me." Perhaps it was the terror in Eleanor's voice, or perhaps Martha Henderson had lived long enough to recognize truth when she heard it, but the older woman's face went pale and she turned to shout for her husband. "Charles, get the horses. Now." Eleanor did not wait to see more. She wheeled Silver around and galloped toward the Matson place. The sun was climbing higher now, and in the distance, she could hear it, a low rumble that sounded like an approaching train. The Matsons took more convincing. Robert Matson stood on his porch with his rifle, suspicion written across his face. "The dam broke. How do you know this?" "I was up on the ridge. I heard it and saw the water. "Mr. Matson, please, I am begging you, get your family to safety. You can shoot me later if I am wrong, but right now, please just go." His wife, Catherine, appeared behind him with an infant on her hip. She looked past Eleanor toward the northern hills, and her face went white. "Robert, look." A dark line had appeared on the horizon, and it was moving toward them with terrible speed. That was all the convincing Robert Matson needed. He began shouting orders to his children, and the family exploded into panicked activity. Eleanor turned Silver one more time and urged her into a gallop toward the Lawson ranch. It was the furthest from the dam, but not far enough. She could see Garrett's house now, a well-maintained structure with a barn and corral. Cattle grazed in the fields, unaware of the doom racing toward them. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant Garrett was home. Eleanor's throat burned as she screamed his name. "Garrett, Garrett Lawson." A figure emerged from the barn, tall and lean, moving with the fluid grace of a man always ready for trouble. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see his hand drop to the gun at his hip. "Flood," she shouted as she drew closer. "The dam broke, you have to get out." Garrett did not waste time with questions. He took one look at her face, turned on his heel, and began running toward the corral. Within seconds, he had a saddle on his black gelding and was swinging up. He rode to meet her, and when he pulled alongside Silver, Eleanor could see his eyes, sharp and calculating beneath the brim of his hat. "How much time?" His voice was low and calm, as if he asked about the weather. 10 minutes, maybe less. The Hendersons and Matsons are evacuating. We need to ride for high ground, my cattle. There is no time." For a moment, something flickered across his face, pain or anger, Eleanor could not tell. Then he nodded once and gestured toward the eastern hills. "There is a trail. We ride hard, we will make it." They rode. Eleanor had always been a skilled rider, but Garrett Lawson rode like he had been born on horseback. He stayed beside her, occasionally glancing back toward the approaching water. The rumble had become a roar now, and when Eleanor risked a look over her shoulder, her heart nearly stopped. The flood was a churning brown monster, at least 20 feet high, devouring everything in its path. Trees disappeared into the maelstrom. Fences shattered like matchsticks. The Henderson ranch vanished beneath the water as if it had never existed. "Do not look back," Garrett shouted. "Just ride." Silver was tiring, her sides heaving with effort. The hills seemed impossibly far away. Eleanor could feel the spray on her back now, cold and terrifying. They were not going to make it. Then Garrett was beside her, his hand reaching out to grab Silver's bridle. "Hold on." He drove both horses with a ferocity that bordered on brutal, pushing them beyond what should have been possible. Eleanor leaned low over Silver's neck, praying to a god she was not sure listened anymore. The ground began to slope upward. They were on the hill. Behind them, the water slammed into Garrett's ranch with devastating force. The barn exploded into splinters. The house held for a moment, then the walls buckled and it was swept away. The cattle disappeared in seconds, their panicked bellowing cut short. Garrett pulled both horses to a stop on a rocky outcrop about 50 feet above the valley floor. They were safe. Barely. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just stared down at the destruction below. Where 3 ranches had stood that morning, there was now only a brown, churning river carrying the wreckage of lives and livelihoods toward the town downstream. "The town," Eleanor gasped. "We have to warn them." "They will have time," Garrett said quietly. "The valley will slow the water, spread it out. They will see it coming and get to high ground." He turned to look at her, and his expression was unreadable. "How did you know?" Eleanor's hands began to shake. The enormity of what she had done was crashing over her like the flood itself. "I saw the cracks in the dam. I told the water company, but they would not listen. So I made the choice. I broke it myself before it could fail catastrophically and kill everyone without warning." She expected anger, accusations, perhaps violence. Instead, Garrett Lawson did something unexpected. He dismounted, walked to her horse, and reached up to help her down. Eleanor's legs gave out when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her, his arms strong and steady. "You saved our lives," he said simply. Then Eleanor began to cry. Great, gasping sobs that tore from her chest. All the fear, all the guilt, all the grief for her father and her own destroyed ranch came pouring out. And Garrett held her, this stranger with the dangerous reputation, one hand awkwardly patting her back while she soaked his shirt with tears. When the storm finally passed, Eleanor stepped back, wiping at her face with shaking hands. "I am sorry. That was not very dignified. Dignity is overrated." Garrett's mouth quirked slightly, almost a smile. "We should check on the others." They rode along the ridge until they found the Hendersons and the Matsons, both families safe on high ground, watching their homes disappear beneath the water. Martha Henderson wept quietly in her husband's arms. Catherine Matson held her children close, her face blank with shock. When they saw Eleanor, Robert Matson walked over, his expression grim. "You saved us," he said. "Why were you up at the dam?" Eleanor took a breath. She could lie, claim she had just happened to be riding by. But these people deserved the truth. "I broke the dam deliberately. I saw it was failing and the water company refused to act. I made the choice to break it in a controlled way so you would have time to escape instead of dying when it collapsed without warning." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles Henderson spoke first. "You destroyed your own ranch to save ours." "My ranch was already lost," Eleanor said quietly. "The debts, the drought, everything. At least this way something good came from it." "The law will not see it that way," Robert Matson said, but his tone was not unkind. "You destroyed company property. They will want someone to pay. Let them come for me then." Eleanor lifted her chin, trying to look braver than she felt. "I will face whatever consequences there are." "No." Garrett's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "She will not face it alone." Everyone turned to look at him. Garrett's jaw was set in a stubborn line. "Eleanor Owens saved my life and the lives of everyone here. If the law comes for her, they come through us." "Agreed," Charles Henderson said firmly. His wife nodded. "Yes," Robert Matson added, "we will testify that she saved us, that the dam was failing and she had no choice." Eleanor felt tears prickling her eyes again. She blinked them away and managed a shaky smile. "Thank you, all of you." They spent the rest of the day on the ridge, watching the water slowly recede. By evening, riders arrived from town, led by Sheriff Marcus Webb. The sheriff was a portly man in his 50s with a handlebar mustache and a reputation for fairness. He listened gravely as Eleanor explained what had happened and why. "The water company is going to want your head," Webb said when she finished. "But from what I can see, you likely saved 100 lives today. The town had time to prepare because of you. No one died downstream." "What about the ranches?" Eleanor asked. "My home, the Hendersons, the Matsons, Garrett Lawson, gone," Webb said bluntly. "The water swept through clean. Some livestock survived on high ground, but the buildings are destroyed." He looked at Eleanor with something like sympathy. "Where will you go?" Eleanor had not thought that far ahead. She had no family, no money, nowhere to go. "I do not know." "She can stay at my place in town," Martha Henderson offered immediately. "We have a room above the general store, or with us," Catherine Matson added. "We will be staying with my sister until we can rebuild. She stays with me." Garrett's voice was quiet but absolute. Everyone turned to stare at him again. A faint flush colored his tanned cheeks, but he did not back down. "I have a line shack up in the hills. It is not much, but it is shelter." I will need help salvaging what can be saved from my ranch, and Eleanor knows ranching. It makes sense. It made absolutely no sense, and everyone knew it. A young, unmarried woman staying alone with a bachelor in a remote cabin was scandalous beyond measure. But before Eleanor could protest, Martha Henderson spoke up. "That sounds practical," the older woman said firmly, giving Eleanor a look that clearly said, "Accept the help, you foolish girl. Of course, Catherine and I will ride up regularly to check on you both. Just to help with the work, you understand." "Of course," Catherine agreed, catching on immediately. Sheriff Webb looked like he wanted to argue but ultimately shrugged. "Your business, I suppose. Miss Owens, do not leave the area. The water company will want to question you, and likely there will be some kind of legal proceeding." "I understand, Sheriff." After Webb and his men rode back to town, the small group of survivors began to make plans. The Hendersons would stay with their daughter's family. The Matsons would go to Catherine's sister, and Eleanor would go with Garrett to his line shack in the hills. As night fell, Garrett led Eleanor up a narrow trail into the rugged country east of the valley. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over the landscape. They rode in silence, both exhausted beyond words. Finally, as midnight approached, they reached a small cabin tucked into a grove of oak trees. "It is not much," Garrett said as he dismounted. He was right. The line shack was a single room with a potbelly stove, a narrow cot, a table, and 2 chairs. But it was clean and dry, and after the horrors of the day, it looked like paradise to Eleanor. "It is perfect," she said sincerely. Garrett began building a fire in the stove while Eleanor unsaddled Silver and rubbed the exhausted mare down with handfuls of dry grass. Garrett's gelding, whose name she learned was Ace, stood nearby, too tired even to graze. When Eleanor finally entered the cabin, Garrett had a small fire burning and was frying bacon in a cast iron skillet. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. They shared the bacon with hard biscuits and coffee so strong it could strip paint. It was the best meal Eleanor had ever tasted. Afterward, Garrett gestured to the cot. "You take the bed, I will sleep on the floor." "I cannot take your bed." "Yes, you can." His tone left no room for argument. "You have been through hell today. Sleep." Eleanor was too tired to fight. She lay down on the cot, still fully dressed, and pulled the rough blanket over herself. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Garrett sitting at the table, staring into the fire, his face cast in shadows and light. When Eleanor woke, sunlight was streaming through the single window and the smell of coffee filled the cabin. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered everything. Garrett was already up, standing by the stove. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee is hot." Eleanor joined him, accepting a tin cup of the bitter brew. In the daylight, she could see the lines of exhaustion on Garrett's face. He had not slept much, if at all. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for letting me stay here, for everything. You saved my life yesterday. It seems like the least I can do." Garrett finally looked at her, and Eleanor was struck again by his eyes, dark brown and intense. "What will you do now?" "I do not know. Face the water company, I suppose. Try to figure out what comes next." She took a sip of coffee, burning her tongue. "What about you? Rebuild." "It is what you do in this country. You get knocked down, you get back up." He paused. "I could use help if you are willing. I can pay you in room and board until the legal matters are settled, and then we can figure out a proper wage. You want to hire me? Why not? You know ranching. You are not afraid of hard work, and you are honest enough to risk everything to save people you barely knew." Something flickered in his expression. "Besides, I figure I owe you my life. Seems like the least I can do is give you a job." Eleanor wanted to accept immediately, but honesty compelled her to ask, "What about your reputation? Having an unmarried woman working for you will cause talk." "Let them talk. I stopped caring what people thought about me a long time ago." Garrett set down his coffee cup. "But if you are worried about your reputation, I understand. The offer from the Hendersons still stands, I am sure." Eleanor thought about it. She could take the safe, respectable option and stay with the Hendersons in town. Or she could stay here in this rough cabin with this mysterious man and help build something from the ruins. "I will stay," she said, "but I will earn my keep properly. I am not a charity case. Never thought you were." Garrett held out his hand. "Partners, then." Eleanor shook his hand, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip. Partners. They rode down to what remained of Garrett's ranch that morning. The water had receded, leaving behind a wasteland of mud and debris. The house was completely gone, nothing left but the stone foundation. The barn was a tangle of broken timber, but some things had survived. They found tools scattered across the property, a few pieces of furniture wedged against rocks, and most importantly, about half of Garrett's cattle herd grazing on the hills above the flood line. Eleanor and Garrett worked side by side in the mud, salvaging what they could. It was back-breaking labor made worse by the September heat, but Eleanor threw herself into it with fierce determination. This was something concrete she could do, something to atone for the destruction she had caused. They worked until sunset, then rode back to the line shack with a wagon full of tools and supplies they had recovered. Martha Henderson had been as good as her word, riding up with a basket of food and some blankets. She took one look at Eleanor's mud-splattered dress and exhausted face and clicked her tongue. "You are working too hard, child." "There is much to do," Eleanor said. Martha glanced at Garrett, who was unhitching the wagon horses, then back to Eleanor. "He is a good man, that one. Quiet but good." "You could do worse." "Mrs. Henderson, it is not like that. He is my employer, nothing more. Hum. Martha's expression said she did not believe that for a moment. "Well, employer or not, you both need proper meals. I will come by twice a week with supplies. And Catherine will visit too. We will keep everything respectable." True to her word, Martha became a regular visitor, along with Catherine Matson. The two older women brought food, gossip from town, and a buffer of respectability that silenced most of the wagging tongues. They also brought news about the legal situation. The water company was furious. They wanted Eleanor arrested for destruction of property and were demanding compensation for the dam. But public opinion was firmly on Eleanor's side. Too many people in Paso Robles owed their lives to her warning. The newspaper editor, a progressive man named James Thornton, wrote a scathing editorial about the company's negligence in maintaining the dam. "They are calling you the angel of the valley," Martha reported gleefully one afternoon. "There is even talk of raising money to help rebuild the ranches." Eleanor, who was currently elbow-deep in mud trying to clear a drainage ditch, did not feel much like an angel. But the news gave her hope that perhaps she would not end up in prison after all. As September faded into October, a routine developed. Eleanor and Garrett would rise before dawn and ride down to the ranch property. They worked on clearing debris, salvaging materials, and preparing the ground for rebuilding. In the evenings, they would return to the line shack, eat whatever Martha or Catherine had brought, and sit by the fire talking. It was during these conversations that Eleanor began to learn about Garrett Lawson. He had indeed been a lawman in Texas, a ranger who had tracked outlaws across the frontier. He had killed men, 3 that Eleanor knew about, likely more he did not mention. But he had left that life behind after his younger brother was murdered by a gang Garrett had put in prison. "I could not do it anymore," he said one night, staring into the fire. knowing that every man I arrested might have someone who would come after my family. So I left, changed my name, and came here to start over. Lawson is not your real name. It is now. He looked at her. The man I was in Texas died with my brother. Garrett Lawson is who I chose to be. Eleanor understood that. She had been Thomas Owens's daughter, defined by her father's reputation and his debts. Now she was something else, though she was not sure what yet. Do you regret it, leaving? Every day. And never. Garrett poked at the fire with a stick. It is complicated. Life usually is. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his usually stern face. You are wise beyond your years, Eleanor Owens. I am 23, not a child. I am 30. Is that too old for you? The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor's heart began to pound. Too old for what? Garrett set down the stick and turned to face her fully. I have been trying to maintain proper boundaries. You are in my employ. You are dependent on me for shelter, and I did not want to take advantage of the situation. But I cannot stop thinking about you. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since you came racing down the valley screaming about the flood with your hair flying behind you like a banner. Eleanor could hardly breathe. I think about you too. Then we have a problem. Garrett stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Because I am trying very hard to be a gentleman, and it is getting more difficult every day. Eleanor rose and crossed the small room to stand beside him. Outside, the moon painted the hills silver. What if I do not want you to be a gentleman? Garrett turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her shiver. Eleanor, I am not a foolish girl with romantic notions, she said firmly. I know what I want. I want to stay here and help you rebuild. I want to make a life in this place, and I want you. She took a breath. But if you do not feel the same way, tell me now and we will never speak of it again. For a long moment, Garrett just looked at her. Then he reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I feel the same way. God help me, Eleanor. I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day. Then stop fighting it, she whispered. Garrett leaned down and kissed her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as Eleanor responded. She wrapped her arms around his neck and he pulled her close, one hand tangling in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. We should do this properly, Garrett said, his forehead resting against hers. Courting and all that. We live together in a one-room cabin. I think we are past proper courting. He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. Fair point. But I want to do right by you. When the legal mess is settled and the ranch is rebuilt, I want to marry you if you will have me. That sounds suspiciously like a proposal. It is exactly a proposal. Garrett pulled back to look at her seriously. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks. But Eleanor, you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. You risked everything to save people you barely knew. You destroyed your own home to give others a chance. How could I not love you? Eleanor felt tears welling up, but this time they were happy tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. They kissed again, and this time there was joy in it, and promise, and the beginning of something neither had expected to find. The next morning, Martha Henderson arrived with her weekly supplies and took one look at Eleanor's radiant face before breaking into a knowing smile. Well, it is about time, she declared. Charles owes me $5. I said you two would be engaged by November, and he said Christmas. You bet on us? Eleanor asked, torn between amusement and embarrassment. The whole town has been betting on when Garrett Lawson would finally admit he is in love with you. Martha began unpacking her basket. Catherine had October 15th, so she's going to be insufferable about winning. Garrett, who had been standing in the doorway looking bemused, spoke up. The whole town knows, darling man, everyone with eyes knows. You look at Eleanor like she hung the moon. Martha pulled out a fresh loaf of bread. "Now, when is the wedding? Please say soon so I can win the next round of betting." Despite the teasing, Martha's joy was genuine, and when the news spread through Paso Robles, the response was overwhelmingly positive. It seemed the town had decided that the angel of the valley deserved her happiness. The legal proceedings began in early November. The water company brought charges against Eleanor, but their case collapsed almost immediately when an independent engineer examined the dam site and testified that the structure had been criminally neglected and would have failed within days regardless of Eleanor's actions. The judge, a stern man named Hamilton Pierce, dismissed the charges and issued a scathing rebuke to the water company for their negligence. Furthermore, Judge Pierce ordered the company to pay compensation to all the property owners affected by the flood, including Eleanor herself. It was not enough to cover the full losses, but combined with the fund the townspeople had raised, it gave Eleanor, the Hendersons, and the Matsons enough to begin rebuilding. With her legal troubles resolved, Eleanor threw herself into planning the rebuild. Garrett wanted to construct a larger house this time, one with multiple rooms and a proper kitchen. Eleanor sketched designs late into the night, creating a home that would be warm and welcoming. The whole community pitched in to help. Men from town arrived with lumber and tools. Women brought food to feed the workers. Even people Eleanor barely knew showed up to haul timber and hammer nails. It was the frontier way, neighbors helping neighbors, and Eleanor was moved to tears more than once by the generosity. In early December, Martha Henderson cornered Eleanor at the building site with a determined expression. "We need to talk about your wedding. Garrett and I were thinking of a simple ceremony in the spring," Eleanor said. "Nonsense. You will marry at Christmas like civilized people. I have already spoken to Reverend Walsh and reserved the church. But Martha, the house will not be finished and I have nothing to wear, and the house will be far enough along by then. You can borrow my daughter's wedding dress, and that is the end of the discussion." Martha folded her arms. "You saved all our lives, Eleanor. Let us give you a proper wedding in return." Eleanor found herself blinking back tears again. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Oh, hush. Now let us talk about flowers." The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of activity. The house took shape rapidly with so many hands helping. It was a beautiful structure, built to withstand floods and drought and time. Garrett insisted on a wide front porch where they could sit in the evenings, and Eleanor designed a kitchen with large windows to let in the morning light. Catherine Matson organized the women of Paso Robles to help prepare for the wedding. Martha's daughter's dress was altered to fit Eleanor's taller frame. Decorations were crafted from pine boughs and wild holly. The church was cleaned until it sparkled. Garrett, meanwhile, worked himself nearly to exhaustion finishing the house. Eleanor would find him late at night, still hammering by lantern light, determined to have their home ready before the wedding. "You are going to collapse," she told him one evening, taking the hammer from his hand. "I want it perfect for you." "It is already perfect. We are perfect." She kissed him softly. "Come to bed. The house can wait another day." They had maintained separate sleeping arrangements despite their engagement, Eleanor using the lined shack while Garrett slept in the partially completed house. It was the proper thing to do, though it was becoming increasingly difficult for both of them. On Christmas Eve morning, Eleanor stood in Martha Henderson's room above the general store, wearing the borrowed wedding dress and feeling like she might faint from nervousness. The dress was beautiful, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Martha had pinned Eleanor's dark hair up in an elegant style, weaving in small white flowers. "You look like an angel," Catherine Matson said softly. "Our angel of the valley." I am just Eleanor, she protested, but she could not help smiling at her reflection. She did look pretty. More than pretty. She looked happy. The church was packed when Eleanor arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the wedding. She recognized faces from every corner of Paso Robles, people whose lives she had saved, people she barely knew, all there to celebrate. But Eleanor only had eyes for the man waiting at the altar. Garrett wore a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. When he saw Eleanor, his expression transformed into something so tender and full of love that she felt her breath catch. Charles Henderson escorted her down the aisle, and when he placed her hand in Garrett's, she felt like she was finally, truly home. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony, his voice warm and resonant. Eleanor barely heard the words. She was lost in Garrett's eyes, in the feeling of his hand holding hers, in the absolute certainty that this was right. I, Garrett Lawson, take you, Eleanor Owens, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Garrett said, his voice steady and sure. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by your side through whatever comes. From this day forward, you will never face anything alone. Eleanor's voice shook slightly as she made her own vows. I, Eleanor Owens, take you, Garrett Lawson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you. Whatever storms come, we will weather them together. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed Eleanor with such passion that several people in the congregation gasped, then cheered. Eleanor laughed against his mouth, giddy with joy. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and candles. There was food and music and dancing. Eleanor waltzed with Garrett, with Charles Henderson, with Robert Matson, with half the men in Paso Robles. Garrett danced with Martha, with Catherine, with every woman who asked, though his eyes never left Eleanor for long. As the evening wore on, Martha pulled Eleanor aside. It is time, dear. Garrett has the wagon ready to take you home. Home. The word filled Eleanor with warmth. She hugged Martha tightly. Thank you for everything. I could not have done this without you. You saved us first, Martha said firmly. Now go. Your husband is waiting. Garrett helped Eleanor into the wagon, and they rode through the cold December night toward their ranch. The house rose against the starlit sky, lanterns glowing in the windows. Garrett had finished it just in time. He carried Eleanor over the threshold, making her laugh, then set her down gently in the main room. A fire crackled in the hearth. Candles cast soft light over the new furniture, simple but sturdy pieces Garrett had built himself. Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson, Garrett said softly. It is beautiful, Eleanor whispered, looking around at the home they would share. You are beautiful. Garrett cupped her face in his hands. Eleanor, I know I am not good with words. I am rough and I have a dark past, and I am probably not the husband you dreamed of as a girl. But I swear to you I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. You already are. Eleanor stood on her toes to kiss him. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You believed in me when no one else did. You loved me. I will always love you, Garrett promised. They spent their wedding night in the new house. In the bedroom Garrett had finished with special care, and it was everything Eleanor had dreamed of and more. Garrett was gentle and passionate, making her feel cherished and desired. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Eleanor felt a peace she had never known. I keep thinking about that day, she said softly. When I broke the dam, I was so terrified I thought I might hang for it. You saved us all. Garrett stroked her hair. You are the bravest person I have ever known. I was just trying to do the right thing. That is what makes you brave, knowing something needs to be done and doing it even when it costs you everything. He kissed the top of her head. I love you, Eleanor Lawson. I love you too." The first months of their marriage were hard work, but filled with joy. They finished the last details of the house, built a new barn, and began restocking the ranch with cattle purchased from a rancher in the next valley. Garrett proved to be a patient teacher, showing Eleanor the finer points of ranch management, though she often surprised him with how much she already knew. "Your father taught you well," he said one afternoon as they mended fence together. "He taught me everything except how to keep a ranch profitable," Eleanor said wryly. "But I am learning." Indeed, she was. Eleanor had a head for numbers and organization that complemented Garrett's practical skills. Together, they made the ranch more efficient than it had ever been. By spring, they had paid off their remaining debts and even turned a small profit. The Hendersons and Matsons were also rebuilding, and the valley began to recover from the flood. New grass grew where the water had scoured the earth. Trees sprouted. Life returned. In May, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She told Garrett one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, the very porch he had insisted on building. "Are you sure?" His face was a mixture of joy and terror. "Very sure." Eleanor took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Garrett pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered. "Eleanor, I never thought I would have this. A home, a wife, a family. After everything that happened in Texas, I thought I was done with happiness." "You deserve happiness," Eleanor said firmly. "We both do. After everything we have been through, we have earned it." Martha Henderson was overjoyed when she heard the news and immediately began knitting tiny clothes. Catherine Matson shared advice about pregnancy and childbirth, having been through it 6 times herself. The women of Paso Robles rallied around Eleanor, offering support and encouragement. Garrett became almost comically protective. He tried to stop Eleanor from riding, from lifting anything heavy, from working too hard. Eleanor bore his fussing with good humor, though she put her foot down when he suggested she should stay in bed for the entire pregnancy. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," she informed him. "I am not made of glass. You are carrying my child. That makes you the most precious thing in the world to me." How could she argue with that? Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1885, with Martha and Catherine in attendance. It was a difficult birth, longer and more painful than Eleanor had expected, and there were moments when she wondered if she would survive. But Garrett never left her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and finally, the baby arrived with a lusty cry that filled the room. "A boy," Martha announced, placing the tiny, red-faced infant in Eleanor's arms. "A healthy, perfect boy." Eleanor looked down at her son and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. He had Garrett's dark hair and eyes, and when he wrapped his tiny fingers around hers, she fell completely in love. "What should we name him?" she asked Garrett, who was staring at the baby with an expression of awe. "I was thinking Thomas," Garrett said quietly, "after your father, if that is all right with you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "That is perfect. Thomas Lawson." Little Thomas proved to be a content baby, rarely crying except when hungry. He had his father's temperament, calm and observant. Garrett was a devoted father, often sitting for hours just watching the baby sleep, as if he could not quite believe this miracle was real. "I never knew I could feel this way," he confessed to Eleanor one night as they stood over the cradle together. "Like my heart is walking around outside my body." "That is what love is," Eleanor said, leaning against him. "Terrifying and wonderful all at once." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Garrett and Eleanor expanded their operation, buying more cattle and hiring hands to help with the work. The valley had fully recovered from the flood, and the Morrison Dam had been rebuilt properly this time, with new management overseeing its maintenance. Eleanor occasionally rode up to the dam, remembering that September morning when she had made the hardest decision of her life. The water company had placed a plaque at the site commemorating the lives saved during the flood. It called Eleanor a hero, though she had never felt like one. "You are thinking about that day again," Garrett said, coming up beside her on his horse. Little Thomas was strapped to his father's chest in a sling Catherine had made, his dark eyes taking in the world with solemn interest. "I still wonder if I did the right thing," Eleanor admitted. "So much was destroyed, and so many lived because of you, including us." Garrett gestured to the thriving valley below. "Look at what has been built from those ruins, Eleanor. The Hendersons have a new ranch that is better than their old one. The Matsons expanded and are more successful than ever. And we have this, a life and a family that would not exist if you had not been brave enough to act." Eleanor looked at her husband and son, at the beautiful valley spread below them, and felt the last of her guilt finally release. Garrett was right. From destruction had come new life, new chances, new hope. When Thomas was 3 years old, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. Where Thomas was calm and serious like his father, Grace was a whirlwind of energy and joy, laughing constantly and getting into everything. She had Eleanor's green eyes and Garrett's dark hair, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. "You are spoiling her," Eleanor said one evening, watching Garrett carry Grace around on his shoulders while she shrieked with delight. "She is my princess. Princesses should be spoiled. She is going to be impossible when she gets older. Good. The world needs more impossible women." Garrett swung Grace down and kissed her forehead. "Women like her mother, who do what is right no matter the cost." 2 years later, a third child arrived, another son they named William. Billy, as he became known, was a perfect blend of his siblings, with Thomas's calm nature and Grace's infectious energy. The house rang with laughter and chaos, and Eleanor had never been happier. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Garrett and Eleanor became respected members of the Paso Robles community. They hosted barn dances, helped neighbors in need, and built a life that was rich in every way that mattered. Martha Henderson and Charles both lived to see their grandchildren grow, and they doted on Eleanor's children as if they were their own blood. Catherine Matson's 6 children grew up alongside Thomas, Grace, and Billy, and the two families remained close friends. On September 19, 1895, 12 years to the day after Eleanor broke the Morrison Dam, the town of Paso Robles held a special commemoration. A statue was unveiled in the town square, a bronze figure of a woman on horseback, racing to sound the alarm. The plaque read, "Eleanor Owens Lawson, the angel of the valley who sacrificed everything to save her neighbors." Eleanor stood with her family, watching the unveiling, and felt Garrett's arm around her shoulders. Thomas was 15 now, already as tall as his father and learning to run the ranch. Grace was 12, wild and beautiful and determined to be the first woman veterinarian in California. Billy was 10, sweet-natured and thoughtful, always bringing home injured animals for Eleanor to nurse back to health. "What do you think?" Garrett asked softly as the crowd applauded. "I think I was just a scared woman trying to do the right thing," Eleanor said, "but I am glad something good came from it. Everything good in my life came from it." Garrett kissed her temple. "You, our children, this life, I would not change a single moment." Eleanor looked at the statue, at the frozen image of the woman she had been that desperate September morning. Then she looked at her husband and children, at the community they had built, at the life they had created from loss and destruction and courage. "Neither would I," she said. Not a single moment. Years continued to pass in contentment and prosperity. Thomas grew into a strong young man who took naturally to ranching, though he surprised everyone by falling in love with a schoolteacher named Sarah Collins and showing a gentler side than his serious exterior suggested. They married when Thomas was 21, and Sarah moved into the ranch, bringing books and culture and a sharp wit that kept everyone on their toes. Grace, true to her determined nature, left for San Francisco to study at a veterinary college, one of only a handful of women in the program. She wrote long letters home about her studies, and Eleanor read them with pride even as she missed her daughter terribly. Billy developed a talent for horse training and began breeding some of the finest stock in California. His patience and understanding of animals was almost uncanny, and people came from across the state to buy his horses. Garrett's hair turned silver at the temples, though he remained as strong and vital as ever. Eleanor found the silver distinguished and told him so regularly. She had grown into her role as matriarch of the family and pillar of the community, though she still sometimes felt like that frightened girl racing to outrun a flood. In 1902, Eleanor and Garrett became grandparents when Thomas and Sarah welcomed a daughter. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Eleanor was overwhelmed with emotion, thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If she had not broken the dam, if she had not met Garrett, this precious child would not exist. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, standing beside her as she rocked the baby. "I am thinking about how one decision can change everything," Eleanor said. "How one act of courage or desperation or love can ripple forward through time." "I think about that too," Garrett admitted. "About how close I came to losing everything before I ever had it. If you had not warned me that day, I would have died in the flood, and all of this," he gestured around at their family, their home, their life, "would never have existed." Grace returned from San Francisco with her veterinary degree and opened a practice in Paso Robles, becoming something of a local celebrity as California's first female veterinarian. She was courted by several young men but remained resolutely single, declaring she was married to her work. Eleanor worried, but Garrett assured her that Grace would find love in her own time, if that was what she wanted. Billy married at 25, choosing a quiet girl named Emma who shared his love of horses. They built a house on the edge of the ranch property and began raising their own family. The years were not without hardship. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and difficult harvests. In 1905, Garrett suffered a serious injury when a horse threw him, breaking his leg badly. Eleanor nursed him through the recovery, and for the first time they both felt the weight of their years. Garrett was 52, Eleanor 45, no longer young but not yet old. "I am slowing down," Garrett said one evening as they sat on their beloved porch, watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. "We both are," Eleanor agreed. "But we have earned the right to slow down. We have worked hard, built something lasting. Let Thomas and Billy handle more of the daily operations." "You are right." Garrett reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. As always, they began to step back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, though neither could fully retire. It was too much a part of who they were. Instead, they became advisors and grandparents, passing on their knowledge and enjoying the fruits of their labor. In 1910, Grace surprised everyone by announcing her engagement to a fellow veterinarian named Daniel Porter, who had moved to California from New York. Eleanor watched her daughter marry with tears of joy, seeing in Grace the same fierce independence and strength she had once possessed herself. Martha Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1911, and Eleanor wept at the funeral, remembering how the older woman had been a mother to her when she had needed one most. Charles followed his beloved wife 6 months later, and Eleanor and Garrett stood with their children and grandchildren to honor the couple who had been their first friends in the darkest time. Catherine Matson remained vibrant well into her 70s, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She and Eleanor remained close, two women who had survived the flood and built new lives from the wreckage. As the 20th century's second decade progressed, Eleanor found herself looking back more and more on that pivotal day in 1883. She was 63 years old now, a grandmother many times over, a respected elder of Paso Robles. The wild young woman who had broken a dam seemed like someone from another lifetime, but she was still in there, Eleanor realized. That courage, that willingness to sacrifice everything for what was right, it was still part of her. It showed in the way she stood up for women's suffrage at town meetings, in how she insisted her granddaughters receive the same education as her grandsons, in the quiet strength she brought to every situation. Garrett, at 70, had truly slowed down. His hair was white now, his movements stiffer, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Eleanor had only deepened with time. They still sat on their porch every evening, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about their day and their family and their blessings. "You ever regret it?" Garrett asked one evening in the summer of 1920. "The way we came together, the circumstances." "Never," Eleanor said firmly. "I regret that others lost their homes, that the flood caused so much damage, but I do not regret saving you. I do not regret our life together. This has been better than anything I could have imagined. I love you, Eleanor Lawson. I have loved you for 37 years, and I will love you until I draw my last breath." "And beyond," Eleanor said, leaning against his shoulder. "Our love will go beyond, in our children and grandchildren, in the ranch we built, in the life we created together." Thomas had taken full control of the ranch by then, running it with the same dedication his father had shown. He and Sarah had given Eleanor and Garrett 4 grandchildren, all of whom adored spending time at the original ranch house. Billy and Emma had 3 children of their own, and Grace and Daniel had 2. The ranch had expanded to become one of the largest and most successful in the region. The Lawson name was respected throughout California, and all of it traced back to that September morning when Eleanor Owens had made the hardest choice of her life. In the spring of 1923, Paso Robles held a 40th anniversary commemoration of the Morrison Dam flood. The statue in the town square had weathered to a dark patina, but it still stood proud, a reminder of courage and sacrifice. Eleanor, now 83 years old and moving slowly with a cane, stood with her family as the mayor gave a speech about heroism and community. Garrett stood beside her, 90 years old but still standing tall, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, a testament to the life they had built. After the ceremony, a young reporter approached Eleanor, asking if she would answer some questions for a story he was writing about the flood. "What made you do it?" he asked. "What made you decide to break the dam?" Eleanor thought about it carefully. "Fear," she said finally, "and hope. I was terrified of what would happen if I did nothing. But I hoped that if I acted, if I gave people warning, they might survive. I destroyed my own home to give others a chance. It seemed like the only choice at the time. And meeting your husband, that must have felt like fate." Eleanor looked at Garrett, who was talking to Thomas and Billy, his face animated despite his years. "It was not fate," she said. "It was choice. I chose to break the dam. I chose to warn people. Garrett chose to offer me shelter and employment. We chose to fall in love. We chose to build this life together. Every day we choose each other. That is not fate, that is love." The reporter scribbled notes frantically. "That is beautiful." "It is true," Eleanor said simply. "Love is not something that happens to you. It is something you do every single day, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." As the sun set that evening, Eleanor and Garrett sat on their porch one more time. The ranch spread out before them, golden in the fading light. Cattle grazed peacefully. The house they had built together stood strong against the sky. In the distance, they could see Thomas and Billy working with the horses, continuing the legacy. 40 years, Garrett said softly. 40 years since you came racing into my life. Best decision I ever made, Eleanor said. Breaking that dam brought me to you, and you gave me everything I never knew I needed. We gave each other everything, Garrett corrected. You saved my life, and I got to spend it loving you. That is more than any man deserves. Nonsense. You deserve every happiness, Garrett Lawson. And so do I. We earned this, you and I. We took the worst day of our lives and turned it into something beautiful. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, holding hands as they had done for 40 years. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but Eleanor faced it without fear. She had faced down floods and legal troubles and droughts and loss. She had broken a dam and built a life. She had loved and been loved in return. Whatever came next, she and Garrett would face it together as they had faced everything. Partners, lovers, friends, united by a bond forged in flood water and tempered by time. The ranch would continue, passed down through generations. The story would be told and retold, becoming legend. But Eleanor Owens Lawson and Garrett Lawson would always be remembered not just for the dramatic events that brought them together, but for the quiet, enduring love that sustained them through 40 years of marriage and partnership. In the end, that was their true legacy. Not the ranch, not the statue, not the dramatic story of the broken dam. It was the love they had chosen every single day, the family they had raised, the life they had built together from ruins and courage and hope. As the night deepened and the chill of evening settled over the valley, Garrett helped Eleanor to her feet, and they walked together into the house they had made a home. Behind them, the ranch stood peaceful under the stars, a testament to what could be built when two people chose love over fear, hope over despair, and each other above all else. Their story was complete, a circle drawn from that frantic September morning to this peaceful spring evening. The flood that had taken so much had also given them everything that mattered. And as Eleanor settled into bed beside the man she had loved for 40 years, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the courage to break the dam, for the cowboy who had offered her shelter, and for every single day of the beautiful life they had created together. Garrett pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her silver hair, and murmured, "I love you, my brave Eleanor." "I love you too," she whispered back, "always and forever." And in the quiet of their bedroom, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the evidence of their love, Eleanor Owens Lawson and Garrett Lawson drifted off to sleep, their hands clasped together, their hearts beating in sync, knowing they had lived a life worth living, a love worth having, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The end of their story was not sad but triumphant, not a closing but a continuation, as their love lived on in their children, their grandchildren, and in the very land they had worked and loved and defended. The broken dam had released more than water that September morning in 1883. It had released two souls to find each other, to build something lasting, to prove that from destruction can come creation, from loss can come love, and from courage can come everything worth having in this world. Their story was not just one of survival, but of thriving. Not just of love found, but of love nurtured and grown and sustained across decades. It was a story that proved that the wildest adventures sometimes lead to the quietest, most profound happiness, and that true courage is not just breaking a dam or facing down danger, but choosing every day to love, to build, to hope, and to believe in the possibility of something better. And so, in the heart of California's Wild West, in a valley that had once been scoured by flood waters but now bloomed with life, the legacy of Eleanor and Garrett Lawson stood as eternal proof that love, when chosen and nurtured and protected, can outlast any storm, overcome any obstacle, and create miracles from the most unlikely beginnings.